Coming up, NBA trade season is upon us, and the Brooklyn Nets are at the center of speculation with one player who could be the most sought after on the market. I'll break down all of that and more after the theme music. What is up, Nets world? We're back here on the Believe in Nets podcast on the Believe Podcast Network. I'm your host, Erik Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com. And before we get into anything, if you do not already, go subscribe to Believe in Nets wherever you get your podcasts. More importantly, go to my YouTube channel at Erik Slater NBA. Subscribe. If you like my content, like this video and others, comment. Anything you can do to engage really goes a long way, and I appreciate it. But on today's episode, NBA trade season is here, so we're going to be focusing on the Brooklyn Nets, namely Cam Johnson, a player who has really lit the league on fire in the first third of this NBA season and has become a player who seems like he's going to be one of the most sought after on the trade market, definitely the most sought after wing. And it is December 12th. And, we've been talking since the beginning of the season. Obviously, the Nets have a lot of players who were at the center of trade speculation since they dealt Mikal Bridges over the summer and pivoted to this rebuild. And the date that we've pointed to is December 15th as the unofficial start of trade season, because that is the date where free agents who signed during the previous offseason can be traded by their new teams. So the pool of players who can be moved just ups, astronomically at this date. So we're 3 days away from that. The trade chatter and the speculation is starting to ramp up, and the Nets are a team that is involved in rumors across the board. The Nets are open for business. That's the feeling around the league right now, is that the Nets, who obviously have outperformed expectations thus far, are 10-14, over halfway to their 18.5 win projection already, on pace for 34 wins right now. And obviously there's been a lot of conversation that myself and others have delved into about how that has hurt their tank and hurt their draft pick, and whether or not Sean Marks will look to kind of course correct that and trade some of these guys. So the feeling around the league is that he is open to it. He's taking calls. He's willing to make deals right now. He's not going to wait, or after this December 15th date, he's not necessarily waiting until the trade deadline. But also the discourse surrounding it is that he's not going to give anyone away, obviously. He wants the best return possible, which you're not expecting a GM to say anything else. But anyone on its roster is obviously available, but the trade chatter has centered on veterans: Cam Johnson, Dennis Schroeder, and Dorian Finney-Smith. And of that group, Cam Johnson is the player who is expected to have the most value. And, it's not just among that group, it's around the whole league. I think it was ESPN's Tim McMahon who was on the Hoop Collective and said that he spoke with an NBA GM and he asked him which player is going to, who's going to be the best player traded at this year's deadline. And that GM said Cam Johnson. So that gives you a sense of maybe, not a lot of star movement potentially. That could be wrong. We're seeing Jimmy Butler thrown into some trade rumors. But bottom line is that Cam Johnson is going to be a very high-level player traded, and probably the best wing on the trade market. So with that, we are going to, on this episode, break down potential packages and potential teams who make the most sense and could be suitors for Cam Johnson at this year's deadline. And before I get into the specific teams, people I've spoken to around the league have said that the Nets are looking for at least 2 first-round picks for Cam Johnson. That's been the messaging since early in the season. It was the equivalent of 2 first-round picks. Now it could even be more than that. It could be 2 first-round picks. It could be, other young players as opposed to just worthless salary fillers. But 2 first-round picks seems to be the baseline. Schroeder and Dorian Finney-Smith, there's been reporting from other people. Brian Lewis on the Nets beat reported it, said the Nets are looking for a first-round pick for those guys. That's where their asking price is started. But with these things, a lot of times the asking price starts somewhere. The team goes somewhere below that. Sometimes you meet in the middle. Sometimes the team trading the player holds their stance. So that's kind of how these things go. But Cam Johnson, it's been 2 first-round picks. And also it's widely known around the league that the Nets do not want to take back long-term salary in a trade. They're projected to lead the league in cap space next summer. And it's something that Sean Marks has talked about before and after making the Mikal Bridges trade, is with the new team building restrictions of the new CBA. Sean Marks is prioritizing financial flexibility during this rebuild. He wants to maintain that flexibility, and taking back long-term money is not really in the cards for the Nets when they're making these trades, particularly when they're looking at, trades for Cam Johnson. So when you're looking around the league for teams that could be fits for Johnson, you're really looking for three things. You're looking for obviously a team who is a contender or thinks that they are a move away from being a contender. That's one. Two, you're looking for a team that has mid-sized contracts to match salary that aren't necessarily a part of their core, and preferably expiring mid-sized salaries or possibly salaries with 1 year left beyond this season. So that's the first two. The third, a team that has several first-round picks available for trade. That's what the Nets are looking for. They want draft capital. They're prioritizing that. And at this point, with the way Cam Johnson has been playing, he's averaging over 18 points a game, 43% shooting from three on high volume. He's a top 3-4 3-point shooter in the league on high volume. He's also able to hit those threes off of movement and do a lot of different things. He's not just a spot up guy. He's hit a lot more off the dribble this season. He's shooting about, I think, 43% on pull-up threes this season. So a very versatile player and a player who is going to command first-round draft capital. So with that, with all of those guidelines that I set out, let's dive into some of the teams that could potentially be available as trade suitors with the Nets. The first team I want to touch on is the Golden State Warriors. I'm going to touch on 5, 7, 8 teams in this. Golden State Warriors, not in any order. This isn't by order of, who I think is the most likely to who I think is the least likely. It's just the order that I put them in. Golden State Warriors are one, and I think a team that's appropriate to start on because ESPN's Shams Charania reported a couple days ago now that the Warriors are among the teams that have called the Nets on Johnson, Dennis Schroeder, Dorian Finney-Smith. And that's not surprising because the Warriors have been active in trade negotiations over the last year. They're trying to elongate Stephen Curry's window. He's still playing like one of the best players in the league. And it seems like they feel, even though they're not as close to contention or winning a title as they were in prior years, that they have an obligation to elongate his window and give him the best shot while he is still playing at this level. They were in negotiations for Paul George and Lauri Markkanen this summer, but it was pretty clear that they weren't comfortable giving up what would be necessary to get those guys. They didn't want to give up, Brandon Pods. They didn't want to give up Jonathan Kuminga, all the first-round picks. Like, they weren't comfortable doing that. So if you're talking about a less expensive option who would be a great fit, Cam Johnson is a very good candidate for them to go after in a trade, would offer just a great fit as a movement shooter in that Steve Kerr system alongside Stephen Curry and Draymond Green. There are some things that complicate a trade with the Warriors when it comes to Cam Johnson. The Warriors are hard capped at the first apron, which means that they can't take in more money than they send out in a trade. So Cam Johnson's making $23.6 million this year. That means they have to match that salary and get all the way to that number. Whereas teams who aren't hard capped at that apron or over the apron only have to get to around $16.5 million to match Cam's salary. So that is one of the hurdles with Golden State. But I still think that there are trades that can be made with the Warriors. And this is one that I just wrote an article on all this for Clutch Points. Some of you may have seen it, but this is one trade that I think could make sense for both sides. And the package is DeAnthony Melton, who suffered a season-ending injuries on around a $13 million expiring contract. Gary Payton, a $9 million expiring, a guy who's not necessarily a core part of their rotation. And Gui Santos thrown in there as a minimum, with 2 first-round picks, one in 2025 and one in 2028. That matches the salary and gets you there from the Nets end. So if you're looking at the Warriors, they part with 3 guys who aren't a part of their rotation, and they give up 2 future first-round picks. One this year, which will probably be low, and then one in 2028, where that's a little bit more of the risk with them. Steph Curry is going to be, I think, 39 or 40 at that point. He's going to be nearing the end of his career, if not done with his career. So that's where the risk comes in, but that's what you have to pay for parting with 3 guys who aren't part of your rotation and a 2025 first that's going to be in the bottom half of the draft. The real price to pay is parting with that 2028 first, potentially unprotected. For the Nets, if you're talking about why the Nets would do this deal, they're accomplishing 2 things in this deal. You might say, oh, it's DeAnthony Melton, Gary Payton, Gui Santos. Like, the Nets aren't getting anything here. But all 3 of those guys are expiring contracts. So what the Nets do in this is they accomplish that goal of even further maximizing their 2025 cap space. They're adding a $24 million or $22 million, whatever Cam's making next season. They're adding that chunk to their league leading cap space next year. In the process, they're also picking up 2 first-round picks, one of which comes late in this draft, admittedly, most likely late in this draft, but they could use that. They already have, outside of their pick, which is hopefully going to be high after making these trades, they have 3 other first-round picks in this draft. Now they add a 4th. If they want to move up into the late lottery or do something along those lines, they could use these picks to consolidate, make a move up. So that's another option. And then you talk about the 2028 first, which I would think that they would push to be unprotected. That's coming when Steph Curry is going to be nearing the end of his career. Draymond Green, who knows what's happening with that? Things could look a lot different in Golden State. You never know. So that's a dart throw that, with the Warriors trying to elongate Stephen Curry's window and put do the things necessary to give him a chance right now, even if they potentially aren't the closest team to winning a title, that presents an opportunity for the Nets to potentially get a first down the line where they're saying, hey, we got to do what we got to do for Steph now. We'll deal with that later. If the Nets are on the end of the Warriors dealing with that later and that's unprotected, who knows where that pick could land. So the Nets maximize their cap space in this deal, and they get draft capital that has some upside down the line. So I think that this is a trade that could make a lot of sense for both sides. Now, moving on to the next team I want to talk about is the Oklahoma City Thunder, a team that has been mentioned in some speculation and trades for Cam Johnson, but I think a team that makes a lot of sense for good reasons that are explainable. They are the best team in the Western Conference right now, at least by record. And you're talking about a team that people think could be the top threat to dethrone the Boston Celtics, but suffered a second-round exit last year to the Dallas Mavericks. Three-point shooting was an issue for them, and it's continued to be an issue, not a major issue, but an issue this year. They ranked 19th in the NBA in three-point percentage, so they are not one of the better three-point shooting teams, and a team that does want to put as much floor. When you have a guy like SGA, who is a MVP caliber player, a guy who's not necessarily a shooter, though, a guy who likes to get to the rim, a guy who likes to work into the mid-range, you want to surround him with floor spacers. So Cam Johnson would be a good fit in that regard and would be a guy who could really, if they're trying to make a push to solidify themselves as that top threat to dethrone the Boston Celtics, Cam Johnson would be another really good step there after getting Alex Caruso this offseason and some of the other trades that they made. Now, the caveat that I will make with this about the Warriors, I think that a reason that they could be hesitant to do this is because they have extensions for SGA, Chet Holmgren, and Jalen Williams looming in the next couple of years. So it's unclear whether they want to add long-term money like Cam Johnson to their books, who has 2 seasons, 2 years left on his contract after the season. If you look at what they did with Isaiah Hartenstein, they gave him this season, they gave him next season, and then they have the team option the last season of the deal, which gives them an out after that season when those extensions for those guys are going to be coming. With Cam Johnson, he has that 3rd season or that 2nd season after this year locked in. So it's unclear whether they want to add that money and potentially add that to their salary cap sheet when they have to deal with those extensions. But like other teams that I'm going to touch on, there's several teams who I think are in this boat. If you want to maximize the window that you have with those guys, like Chet, like SGA, like Jalen Williams, while you still have them before you have to give them those max it out contracts, if you want to maximize that window, trading for Cam Johnson, giving yourself a shot to make the serious run at a title this playoffs and maximize that chance next year, then deal with that after. I think that's really, really realistic for a team like the Thunder. So a package that I threw together and that I want to talk about is Aaron Wiggins, Kenrich Williams, the Heat 2025 first-round pick, which is lottery protected this year, unprotected next year, and a Nuggets 2027 first. Because Oklahoma City has 10 tradable first-round picks. They're second in the NBA in terms of tradable draft capital. They also have multiple matchable salaries, mid-sized salaries that can be used for matching. They have 3 guys: Aaron Wiggins, Isaiah Joe, Kenrich Williams. They also have a guy like Lou Dort who's making a little more, but I think that they're probably going to want to hold on to this. So in this package, you look at it from the Thunder's end, they're giving up Aaron Wiggins, a player who is in and out of their rotation. I think that they like, it seems like, from things that I've read, things that I've seen, but a guy who's not exactly a solidified rotation piece, with them having Lou Dort, them having Caruso, then drafting Kason Wallace last year. They have guys who are in the backcourt. So you give up him, Kenrich Williams, a guy who's out of the rotation, and you give up 2 first-round picks, neither of which are their own first-round picks. So they might actually push to put their own first-round pick in this trade season instead of the Heats, or they also have the Philadelphia 76ers, which is top 4 protected, and looks like it could be a really juicy pick. So I went with the Heat one. I think that was kind of like a middle ground between that Sixers pick and between the Thunder's own pick. I think the Nets would push for either the Heat or the Sixers pick. But if you're looking at this trade, the Nets get Aaron Wiggins, a player who I think actually might have some value to them. You're looking at what he's able to do this year. He's averaging 10 points per game. He's shooting about 45% from the field, 38% from 3, not on high volume, but a guy who's also on a great contract moving forward. It's under contract for the next 4 seasons at, I think, $34 million total. So that's like $7-8 million a year with a descending structure. So he's going to be making towards the end of his contract around under 5% of the salary cap. He's a guy who's 26 years old right now, a former second-round pick. I do think has a lot of, ability to trend upward. It could project as a role player in the NBA long-term, and a guy who's on a tremendous value contract if he stays on this track. So he's a guy that I think the Nets would have some interest in. I said they don't want to take on long-term money, but a guy like Aaron Wiggins, where it's small long-term money and I think could have value to them as a player, or a guy who they could flip potentially down the line due to his value contract, I think that he makes sense. Kenrich Williams, I think, is under contract for around he has $7 million left on his contract next season, and then he has a team option in 2026-27. So the Nets could get out of his contract after this season. And then you look at the draft capital. They're getting a Heat 2025 first that if it lands, the Heat are potentially looking at trading Jimmy Butler. So if that's the case, this pick might land in the lottery. But if it does, it's unprotected in 2026. And the Heat are going to have a whole different situation. They're generally not one of the teams that you want to bet against because they have Pat Riley, they have Spoelstra. They've been able to build this up. They've been able to stay competitive. But if they hold on to Butler, or however that situation works out, if this pick's in the high teens, early 20s this season because it doesn't fall into the lottery and the Nets get it, it's either a pick that's in the teens and could be valuable, or it's a pick that they could package, as I said, with those other ones to try to move up. If it doesn't convey and it's in the lottery, it's unprotected in 2026. Who knows what that could be? And then the Nets are also picking up a Nuggets 2027 first, which you'd think would be low, but you don't know. 2027, who knows what's going on with Jokic? Who knows what's going on with Jamal Murray? The Nuggets don't look like, where they were at when they won the title. They don't look like that right now. So it's another dart throw for the Nets. So from the Thunder's end, you're giving up 2 guys who aren't necessarily Wiggins somewhat, but aren't necessarily in your rotation, definitely aren't core pieces. And you're giving up 2 first-round picks from other teams. You already have a bevy of picks you're going to have to give up to add a guy like Cam Johnson, who could be a piece that could potentially put you over the top or swing a playoff series or 2. So it makes sense from their end. From the Nets end, you're getting a young piece in Aaron Wiggins, could potentially be something, another dart throw for them, and you're getting 2 first-round picks, both of which could have some upside down the line. So I think a deal that makes sense for both of these teams. Next team, want to move on to the Memphis Grizzlies, a team that I think I've seen mentioned as a team that's checked in on Cam Johnson, but one that you haven't necessarily heard a ton about as a team that could be in the mix there. But you look at the Grizzlies this year, 17-8 record, second best in the Western Conference, third best in the NBA. Ja Morant is back. He's playing well. Jaren Jackson Jr. is having a great season. They obviously have Desmond Bane and the other supporting pieces that they've done. They've done a really nice job of filling out their roster with, cheap supporting pieces that have been successful. So the Grizzlies have this season and next, before they have to extend Jaren Jackson Jr., they have him on one of the better value deals in the league for this season and next. He's making under $30 million. So like I've just said with the Thunder, if they're wanting to maximize that, if they want to really make a run at potentially being a contender in this year's playoffs or next, trading for Cam Johnson could be a move that they could look into. The Grizzlies rank 17th in the NBA in three-point percentage this season. You look at the way that they like to play. They have some guys who can shoot, but you look at Ja Morant as the on-ball alpha guy right there, a guy who loves to drive and attack the basket. You got Jaren Jackson Jr., also Zach Edey, guys who can post up a lot. You're looking to open those driving lanes, open some post-up opportunities, open space on the floor overall. Cam Johnson is a player who I think could be a good fit there. And the Grizzlies have some salaries that could be used to match in a deal. So this is the trade that I thought could make sense for both sides. You got Marcus Smart, a guy who joined the Grizzlies in the 2023 offseason and hasn't had the impact that I think that they expected. He's still, he's not a bad player by any means, but he's a guy who moved to the bench, I think, for their last 8 or 9 games. He's out of the starting lineup. He's 8th on the team in minutes and 8th on the team in scoring, averaging under 10 points per game. So you look at him, and he is a salary that is expiring next season. He's got 1 year left on his contract at about $9 million. But this deal, a simple 1-for-1 trade on the Grizzlies end. You're getting rid of a guy who's moved to the back end of your rotation. You're parting with your first-round pick this year, which, if they continue playing like they are and they get better with the Cam Johnson trade, will be low. And then they're parting with their 2030 first, which also has an option to swap for the less favorable of the Suns and Wizards. So it's either the Grizzlies pick or the less favorable of the Suns and Wizards. And if you're looking at the Grizzlies end, you're giving up a low first, and then you're paying a price, giving up a first down the line, but you make an upgrade from Marcus Smart, a guy who's in the back end of your rotation, not necessarily the floor spacer they were hoping right now. And you're bringing in Cam Johnson, a guy who has been an elite floor spacer and would really add another dimension to their offense alongside Jackson Jr., Desmond Bane, John Morant, Zach Edey as that movement shooter and that guy who can do some things that, maybe they wanted Luke Kennard to do, but Luke Kennard struggling to get in their lineup this year. So you get Cam Johnson, who does it at a higher level, is under team control for the next 2 years. You play out this season and next before that extension for Jaren Jackson Jr. I think that could make sense for them. And for the Nets, you're getting Marcus Smart. You have to eat that money for the next season, but you're getting a first this year. You're getting a first in 2030 with the Grizzlies team that hasn't exactly been the most stable over the past few years. So that's another future first. That's just a dart throw for the Nets. And it also has that swap option where if it doesn't land where you want with the Grizzlies, who knows where the Suns and Wizards are going to be at that point. So that really adds another dimension to that pick where you have the Grizzlies, who knows, and then you have those other two teams. So it gives you some optionality to potentially get the kind of return you're looking for down the line. So a deal that I think makes sense for both sides and a deal that I think is definitely plausible. Next team I want to touch on, we're going to move to the Eastern Conference, the Orlando Magic, a team that showed promise last season, showed promise early this season. Despite injuries that they've been dealing with, they are 17-10, the Magic, third best record in the Eastern Conference. That's come despite a very early injury to Paolo Banchero, presumed their top player, and now another injury to Franz Wagner. They're now without both those guys, but the Magic, I think, could be in a similar situation to things I talked about with the Thunder and things I talked about also with the Grizzlies with Jaren Jackson Jr. They have these two players in Banchero and Franz Wagner who, are on these smaller contracts. So you want to take advantage of that window with those smaller contracts before you have to extend those guys. And the Magic are a team, you're looking at a team that needs three-point shooting. The Orlando Magic need three-point shooting. They knew it this offseason that they had a floor spacing deficit around Banchero and Wagner, two guys who are not high-level three-point shooters. They tried to address it in free agency. They brought in Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, a guy who is a high-level floor spacer and has shot it well with them, but they are still dead last in three-point shooting this season. They're shooting 31% from three. Worst percentage in the league. They've been able to be a good team despite that because of things that they do on the defensive end, because of what they're able to do attacking the basket. But if you want to add that movement shooting, another sniper around those guys, another guy who can open the floor for guys like Paolo and Franz who want to get to the basket, and everybody knows it, Cam Johnson, I don't know if you could think of a better fit. So it makes sense on that end. And then you look at, they're going to be without Paolo and Franz for an extended period now. Both those guys have, I think, oblique tears it is. So they're going to be without those guys for a while. They need secondary shot creation to stay afloat without those guys. Jalen Suggs is shouldering a very heavy burden. They have some other guys, but Cam Johnson, a guy who's come in this season, he's taken it to the basket. He shot really well off the dribble. As I said earlier, he's done some things. He's not an elite shot creator by any means, but he's a guy who can add some secondary shot creation and three-point shooting to try to keep you afloat while those two guys are out. So I think that makes sense. If we're looking at the package of what I put together, potential package I had, Cole Anthony, Gary Harris, the Nuggets first-round pick this year, which is top 5 protected, and the Magic 2027 first. You're looking at this from the Magic end. They give up Cole Anthony, a guy who hasn't been in their rotation really this season. He really struggled in the first round of the playoffs last year where they lost in 7 games to Cleveland. And, you look at the point guard position, they obviously have Jalen Suggs, who they just gave a great contract to, or a big contract to. Really good two-way player. They have Anthony Black, who they picked in the top 10 a couple years ago. So they have those two guys at point guard. Cole Anthony kind of looks like he's on the back end. And then Gary Harris, a veteran who has not been in the rotation early this season. You give up 2 first-round picks, one of which is not your own and should be somewhat lower in this year. And then you give up the 2027 first, but a year that they're probably obviously going to be a good team. So not too much from their end. I think the Nets might actually potentially ask for more in a deal like this. They could ask, for a young player like Tristan Da Silva or Jet Howard or somebody to be thrown in there, or different draft picks. But you're looking at this from the Nets end. They eat Cole Anthony, who I think is under contract for $13 million next season before a team option to 2026-27. So they have to deal with one more year there. And Gary Harris has a $7 million team option next season. So he's basically an expiring contract. So they're taking on one more year of Cole Anthony at $13 million, not a ton of money. They're able to get off Gary Harris, so they clear some cap space, and then they get 2 first-round picks. The Nuggets this year, which is top 5 projected, the Nuggets don't look great to start the season. They have Jokic, so there's obviously, a floor on where that pick could be, but they get the Magic 2027 first. They get the Nuggets first, which could be, maybe in the high teens if you're looking at the best-case scenario. As I said, I think the Nets could potentially ask for more in a deal like this. I think that some of those other packages that I alluded to might have better draft picks or, do more in terms of what they're looking for in terms of financial flexibility. But this is a deal that I think the Magic have a need. I think they have the draft picks, they have the contracts. And even if it's not this exact package, it looks like there could be something that they could work out here. Not just for Cam Johnson, Dennis Schroeder, a guy that, we've talked about if the Magic are potentially looking for shot creation in the short term, alongside, Jalen Suggs, and looking to add some while their 2 guys are out. Dennis Schroeder could be an option. We're focusing this on Cam J, so I'm not going to get too much into Dennis, but the Magic, a team that's competitive, I think a team that's looking to make another step towards legitimate contention, and a team that has some things to work with in a trade. So I think there could be something there. Next team that I want to touch on, the San Antonio Spurs, a team that you might hear and say, Spurs aren't a contender. And look, nobody thinks the Spurs are a contender right now. But when you have a player like Victor Wembanyama, I think that there's always pressure to get better and pressure to make those steps towards contending. So the Spurs you're not a bad team this year. They're around 500. But if you're looking at a team that has disposable draft picks and wants to improve in the next coming seasons, I think they definitely fit the bill. They have 12 tradable first-round picks. The Spurs lead the league in first-round picks. They lead the league in tradable first-round picks. They do have an incentive to improve around Victor Wembanyama. So you get a guy in Cam Johnson who is under contract, under team control for the next 2 seasons, as a lot of three-point shooting, obviously, around Wemby, around that superstar guy, could allow them potentially to play more of the inside-out game instead of having Wemby on the three-point line all the time, even though it seems like Wemby wants to do that. But the Spurs ranked 22nd in three-point shooting this year. So if you're looking at them, you're looking at a team that has, really all the picks in the world to try to do something. You're looking at a team that does have some mid-sized salaries that make this an easy money matching deal. And you're looking at a team that does have some pressure to improve. I think that things could make sense there. So the package that I put together, and if you're looking for a simple, no headaches deal, I think this is it. The Spurs have Harrison Barnes, who they got from the Kings this summer as kind of a throw-in for helping facilitate that DeMar DeRozan sign and trade between them and the Bulls. So you put in Harrison Barnes, who's making around 18 or 19 million this year, and then he's making 19 million next year, I think. So he's got 1 year left on his contract after this season. So the Nets eat that money, which they might not necessarily want to, but they get a Hawks 2025 first and they get a Mavericks 2030 first. The Hawks are looking good this season, but not like one of the best teams in the league. So a pick that could be in the late teens. The Mavericks in 2030 potentially could be lower. Who knows there? But you get 2 first-round picks. You have Harrison Barnes, a guy who you're going to have to eat the money on next season, but he could potentially just negotiate a buyout with the Nets. Would probably be a similar situation to what they're dealing with this year with Bojan Bogdanovic. He's going to be 32, 33 years old next season. Doesn't fit the timeline. So you eat that. You get 2 future first-round picks. As I said, somewhat similar to the Magic. I think some of those other packages might have more enticing draft capital, but the Spurs have 12 first-round picks. The Nets could look to negotiate for which picks that they, think are best for them. But the Spurs have Harrison Barnes. It's an easy 1-for-1 money matching deal, and I think that it does make sense for them, and I think it does make sense for the Nets if the Nets are prioritizing draft capital. So they might not be the team that ultimately makes this deal happen, but they might be a team that's in the mix and could potentially enter, and the Nets could try to use as leverage towards some of these other teams they're negotiating with. So one of several teams that could be in the mix. Nearly rounding this out, there are a few more teams that I want to touch on in my article. Those 5 teams that I touched on first were the real teams, and these were more like the honorable mention group. First team I want to touch on here is the Los Angeles Lakers, a team that has been speculated with the Nets as a potential trade partner for some of these guys for the last 2-3 transaction cycles. They've been rumored for Cam Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith, now Dennis Schroeder. They've been in the mix there a lot, but they're a team that has not wanted to part with their first-round picks. The Lakers have 2 tradable first-round picks that Rob Pelinka has held on to with a death grip, probably despite the wishes of LeBron James, obviously, over there. And they're a team that's in an interesting spot because I don't think anybody thinks that the Lakers are a legitimate title contender this season, but they do have LeBron James, which is always going to bring certain expectations to improve and try to maximize that. So that's why the Lakers are in the honorable mention, category of this for me, because I don't think that they really want to give up those first round picks, but they do have them. Another reason that I don't think it's as realistic is because there are some of those limitations that I spoke about with the Warriors. As the Lakers being over the first apron, they're a team that cannot send out more money than they take in a deal. So they have to match. They have to get all the way to Cam Johnson's $23.6 million number. And when you're looking at the salaries that they have, it could make it kind of difficult because they have some salaries that they have D'Angelo Russell as an expiring contract. And beyond that, they have Rui Hachimura, but then they have some other mid-sized salaries that have years beyond this that the Nets are going to have no interest in. So if you're looking, I think both teams would have to get a little bit more creative in this circumstance. If you're looking at a trade that I think could make some sense, this is something that I put together. It would be D'Angelo Russell, Rui Hachimura, both of those Lakers first-round picks, which are 2029 and 2031, and a couple seconds for Cam Johnson and Dennis Schroeder. If you're looking for a deal that I think makes sense for the Lakers, I think it would be, packaging Russell and Hachimura for a combination of either Johnson and Schroeder or Johnson and Finney-Smith. The reason I don't think a Russell for Johnson, that's expiring money and draft picks that I think, the Nets would want to get that expiring contract in Russell, but the Lakers need Russell. They need a guard. So if they're trading Russell, they need to bring in another guard. So I think that this deal makes some sense because you're giving up Russell and Hachimura to match the money, but you're getting Cam Johnson, you're getting that potential lead guard in Dennis Schroeder, and the Nets are getting those draft picks, which, if the Lakers come to the table with this deal, I think that this is a deal that could be great for the Nets because LeBron's aging. They're not in a position to be giving up first-round picks, in my opinion. But if they do it and if they cave into that pressure and you get these first-round picks, who knows what they could be. So I think that this would be a good deal for the Nets. I'm just skeptical if the Lakers are actually going to give up those draft picks. And they could, but based on how the season's going, based on how LeBron's looked of late, based on some of the embarrassing defensive breakdowns and things we've seen on the court, I think that it's unlikely that they're going to give up these draft picks. So they're a team that would definitely be in the mix, but I have serious doubts about whether they're legitimately going to get in there and do what needs to be done to swing a deal like this. So how I'm feeling on Los Angeles. Another team, last real team I want to talk about is the Houston Rockets, a team that is playing well this season, a familiar trade partner with the Brooklyn Nets. Obviously, Houston has looked good this year. They are, where are they at? Let me see. They are at second in the Western Conference, 17-8. They are, not a good three-point shooting team. They rank 26 in three-point percentage. They're shooting only 33% this season. They've really made their money on the defensive end of the floor. That's where their identity has been. But if they want to add some three-point shooting, some movement shooting, boost that 16th ranked offense they have, Cam Johnson would be a fit. And he's a guy that they have shown interest in the past. This offseason, when they were doing those other talks, Cam Johnson was a name that was thrown in there, according to a lot of different people. But you're looking at the Rockets. A reason that I don't think that they might be involved in this is because they have 4 tradable first-round picks. They are a team that has been rumored as a potential star destination for teams. They were interested in Donovan Mitchell. These other guys that come along, I don't know if Jimmy Butler is going to be in the mix. I don't think he really fits their timeline, but could be. But they're a team, the bottom line, that is set up to be a destination for stars. Do they want to burn some of their draft capital on a guy like Cam Johnson, who's a very good player, but not a star? I have serious doubts about it. And their GM Rafael Stone has said that they aren't going to make in-season trades. GMs say stuff like that all the time. It's not necessarily always true, but something that obviously factors into the conversation here. But if you're looking at a potential package with the Rockets that I think could make some sense for both sides, you got Jeff Green, Jayshawn Tate, two veterans who are expiring contracts. That gets you there with the money for Cam Johnson. They throw in Cam Whitmore, a guy who was, a first-round pick, was one pick ahead of where the Nets took Noah Clowney in 2023. The 20th pick hasn't cracked their rotation, but really athletic, can shoot it somewhat. So a guy who could be interesting for the Nets. So he's like a young sweetener there. They get Phoenix's 2027 first-round pick, which the Nets sent out in the deal to get their own picks back. And then the Rockets relinquish the swap rights they have on the Nets 2027 first. So the Rockets are only giving up one first-round pick in this trade, but they're also relinquishing the swap rights on the Nets 2027 first, which could be of some value to the Nets. It's almost like an insurance policy. From things I've heard and things other people are saying, the Nets aren't viewing this as a long rebuild. So they might be looking to be competitive by 2027, but there's no guarantee. So relinquishing that swap gives them an insurance policy if things don't work out, or if they even do decide they want to elongate this rebuild. So, from the Rockets end, you're giving up three players who aren't in your rotation. You're giving up really only one first-round pick, and you're getting a guy in Cam Johnson who is a high-impact player, a guy who's really going to impact an area of need that you have on the offensive side of the ball, is going to give you a much better shot to compete with some of those teams in the Western Conference come playoff time. If you're looking on the Nets end, you're getting two expiring contracts. So you're adding that chunk of cap space, a significant chunk of cap space, whatever it is with, Cam Whitmore makes however much, but you're adding, say, $18-19 million to your cap space next season. You're getting back a 2027 Phoenix first, which could be a very valuable pick. Who knows where that could land? And then you're also getting back your unprotected, your swap on your pick, which you can now use however you want in 2027. So a deal that I do think makes some sense for both sides. I have, serious doubts about whether Houston, from a financial standpoint, even with some of the extensions that they're going to have to give down the line, or the extensions they just gave, whether they're going to be in the mix for that. But I do think that if they were to get into the mix, they have stuff to work with at the negotiating table that would make sense for the Nets. They have the expiring contracts. They have the draft picks. They have control of some of the Nets' future first-round picks, which they could look to give back to them. So a deal that I think could make sense for both sides, but I have skepticism about Rafael Stone's and Tillman Fertitta's urgency to make a deal like that during this season, where I think they might just look to ride it out and see what they have down the line. So that's pretty much it. Last team that I had mentioned on the honorable mention was the Cleveland Cavaliers, a team that I think for obvious reasons could be a fit for Cam Johnson. They have that core four, their two guards of Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland, their two bigs of Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen. They're always looking to add wing shooting in between that group at that spot. And they have some, they have Max Strus, they have Georges Niang, but they're a team that I think is lacking that elite guy, that elite floor spacer. If they were able to swing a deal for Cam Johnson, that would really add that new dimension to their offense. They have the salary. They have Karis LeVert, familiar face, obviously, who's making around $17 million. He's an expiring contract, so they check that box. They could, package him with, Niang or Dean Wade, guys who are making smaller salaries, so not that big of a deal for the Nets. But where the Cavaliers fall short is the pick department. They only have one tradable first-round pick. That's their first in 2031. I think the Nets are going to be looking for more than that. So while it makes sense from a fit perspective, they have the salary, which is expiring. They're falling short in the picks department there. So I think they're a team that's going to show interest. They've been interested in Cam Johnson for a long time, but I don't think that they necessarily have the assets necessary to get it done. So that about does it. Those are the teams that I think make sense in the mix. Could another team pop in that I'm not talking about? Potentially, but those are the teams that I think will be in this race and potentially could be involved in a little bit of a bidding war, at least, what the Nets are hopeful for, to drive up that price for Cam Johnson. Cam having a great season, a guy who has said that he wants to be with the Nets long-term, a guy who is stepping into a little bit of an expanded role, obviously, this year with Mikal Bridges' departure, and has looked outstanding in that role. But, a guy that I think his value is extremely high right now. He's healthy right now. I've laid out my reasoning on prior pods for why I think that the Nets should move him now. But a guy that with 2 years left on his contract, they don't have to move. They could potentially wait until the offseason. But when you do that, you're risking injury. You're risking the play potentially falling off. So not a guy they have to trade, but a guy that I think they should definitely take a good, long, hard look at the offers, especially given the amount of interest that I think there could be around the league with all of these teams that I just laid out. But that does it for this episode. Believe in Nets on the Believe Podcast Network, your one-stop shop for everything happening across the sports and entertainment world. I'm Erik Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter, clutchpoints.com. You can find all my work on clutchpoints.com. Also, go follow me on Twitter at Erik Slater _. Constant news, updates, analysis, live game tweets, quotes, press conferences, all that. As I said at the top, if you do not already, subscribe to Believe in Nets wherever you get your podcast. Most importantly, go to YouTube, subscribe there. If you're watching this on YouTube, like it, leave a comment. Let me know what you think about these trade offers. Let me know what you think about my work overall. I appreciate all that, but a little bit of a dead period right now. Let's have one game this week due to the in-season tournament scheduling. But after that, they're going to have a few games at home, and they're going to hit the road. And trade season and trade speculation is only on the way up from here. So I'll have all coverage of that and more here on Believe in Nets. Talk to you guys soon.